The rain had been falling on Maplewood Drive for 3 straight days, a steady, grey curtain that turned the world into a watercolour blur. It was the kind of weather that made the old house groan and settle, whispering secrets in the language of creaking floorboards and rattling pipes. For Amelia Clark, it was the perfect excuse to finally tackle the one place she'd avoided since moving in 6 months prior, the attic. The air was thick with the scent of forgotten things, cedar, dust, and the faint, sweet tang of old paper. A single bare bulb swung from a rafter, casting long, dancing shadows over a landscape of sheet-draped furniture and stacked trunks. Amelia was looking for vintage picture frames, something to add character to her too clean, newly renovated home. Instead, under a dusty tarp, she found a trunk. It wasn't locked. The hinges protested with a metallic shriek that echoed in the quiet space. Inside, nestled atop a pile of yellowed linens, was a leather-bound album. She lifted it, the leather cool and supple under her fingers. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, and opened it. The first photograph stole her breath. It was a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, standing on the very porch of this house, but the porch was wrapped in morning glory vines long since torn down. She wore a simple summer dress and a smile so full of joy it seemed to emanate from the faded sepia. On the back, in elegant cursive, was written, Eleanor and Thomas, June, 1947. Our beginning. Amelia turned the pages, lost in a world of sock hops, picnics by the lake, and a wedding photo where Eleanor looked at Thomas as if he'd hung every star in the sky. Then came the later pages, a baby, a toddler, a young boy grinning on a bicycle. The happiness was palpable, a warm echo in the chilly attic. But as the 1960s progressed, the photos grew fewer. The last picture was of Thomas, his face gaunt, sitting in a chair by a window, a blanket over his knees. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her smile gone, replaced by a quiet, steadfast determination. On the back, my brave heart, always. A lump formed in Amelia's throat. She felt like an intruder, a voyeur peering into the most intimate chambers of a love story that had ended long before she was born. Who were these people? The realtor had said the house belonged to a family who'd owned it for decades but had all passed or moved away. This was their heartbeat, pressed between pages of cardstock. So engrossed was she didn't hear the soft footsteps on the attic stairs. The first she knew of another presence was the tremulous, deep voice that broke the profound silence. You found them. Amelia jumped, the album slipping from her hands and landing with a soft thud on the dusty floor. In the doorway of the attic stood a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with disheveled dark hair and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He wore a simple grey Henley and jeans, and he was looking at the open album as if it were a ghost. It was Ben Miller, her neighbor's son. She'd seen him a handful of times visiting his father, Frank, in the neat colonial next door. They'd exchanged polite waves, nothing more. He was a graphic designer who lived in the city, Frank had mentioned once. But the man before her didn't look like a cool, urban creative. He looked utterly shaken, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. Ben, you scared me, Amelia said, her hand flying to her chest. How did you get in? The kitchen door was open. I saw the attic light on from Dad's house. I called out, but you didn't answer. His explanation was rushed, his gaze never leaving the album. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have just walked in. It's okay, she said, though her heart was still racing. She followed his gaze. You know who these people are? His voice trembled when he spoke again, thick with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Eleanor was my grandmother. Thomas was my grandfather. This was their house. The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. The Miller family. Frank must have grown up here. Ben must have spent his childhood Christmases and summers in these very rooms. A wave of embarrassment washed over her. Oh, Ben, I'm so sorry. I was just poking around. I didn't mean to pry into your family's private memories. He finally looked at her, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes disarmed her completely. Don't be sorry. Can I? He gestured toward the album. Of course. She carefully picked it up and handed it to him. He took it as one might handle a holy relic, sinking down to sit opposite her on the floor, his back against an old dresser. He opened it to the first page, and his broad shoulders seemed to sag. I've never seen this, he whispered, his finger tracing Eleanor's smiling face. My dad, he doesn't talk about them much. It was too painful. When they passed, he just packed everything away. Sold the house eventually, but the new owners let him store some things up here. I guess they forgot about it when they moved, and the next people never bothered. For the next hour, the attic ceased to be a storage space. It became a time machine. With Ben turning the pages, the story of Thomas and Eleanor Miller unfolded between them. He knew fragments, stories he'd heard as a child. Thomas, the quiet carpenter who had built the porch swing with his own hands. Eleanor, the spirited school teacher who filled the house with music from an old upright piano. He got sick, Ben said, his voice low, as they reached the final photo. Leukemia. They didn't have the treatments they do now. She cared for him right here, in their bedroom downstairs. Dad was just a teenager. He said she never left his side, never complained. She read to him, played his favorite records, and held his hand until the very end. Amelia felt tears prickle her eyes. What happened to her after? She lived another 30 years, Ben said, closing the album gently. In this house. Never remarried. Dad said she'd sit on that porch swing he built and talk to him as if he was still there. She said love like theirs wasn't something that ended with a heartbeat. The silence that followed was warm, shared, filled with the resonance of the story they'd just witnessed. The rain pattered softly on the roof above them. Why did your dad sell it? Amelia asked softly. Ben looked around, his stormy eyes taking in the rafters, the shadows. Too many memories. For him, they were ghosts that haunted every room. For me, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I always loved this house. It felt alive with love, but it was a monument to a kind of love that felt extinct, unattainable. It intimidated me, in a way. He looked at Amelia then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Thank you for finding this, for caring. That was the beginning. Ben started visiting more often, under the pretext of going through the rest of the attic with her. They found more treasures, Thomas's carved wooden birds, a box of Eleanor's handwritten recipes, a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. They would sit on Amelia's living room floor, artifacts spread around them, and Ben would piece together his family's history, his voice growing stronger, less tremulous, with each shared memory. Amelia learned that Ben was more than a city designer. He was thoughtful, observant, and carried a quiet depth she found increasingly captivating. He learned that Amelia was a freelance illustrator, that she saw stories in everything, and that she had moved to Maplewood Drive looking for a sense of roots she'd never had as an army brat. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of books, their hands brushed. A simple, accidental touch, but the current that passed between them was deliberate and undeniable. They both froze, the air suddenly charged. Ben's eyes found hers, and the question in them was clear, his earlier trepidation replaced by a hopeful intensity. The first kiss happened in the kitchen, amid the smell of coffee and the scattered pages of Eleanor's recipes. It was not a timid kiss. It was a confession, an acknowledgement of something that had been building since that rainy day in the attic, a connection forged through the legacy of a profound love. Their relationship unfolded with the gentle rhythm of small-town life. Long walks under the autumn leaves, shared dinners where Ben would attempt Eleanor's recipes, quiet evenings where Amelia would sketch and Ben would work on his laptop, a comfortable silence between them. He introduced her to his father, Frank, an older, quieter version of Ben, whose eyes misted over when he saw the album but who also smiled, a real smile, for the first time in Ben's recent memory. You've brought him back to life, too, Ben told Amelia one evening, holding her hand as they sat on the porch swing, the very one Thomas had built. Frank had helped Ben restore it, the two of them sanding and staining in a peaceful, wordless communion. But the past, once unlocked, doesn't always rest quietly. Amelia found the letters. They were hidden in the lining of Thomas's old toolbox, which Ben had given to her, saying she needed a proper toolkit for the house. The envelope was brittle, addressed to Eleanor in a frantic, slashing script. It was dated a month before Thomas's death. With a heavy heart, feeling like she was crossing a line, she took it to Ben. He read it aloud, his voice barely a whisper. It was from Thomas. My dearest Eleanor, the pain is a beast today, and the morphine makes the world fuzzy. But my heart, my love for you, is the one clear, sharp, perfect thing. I am not afraid of dying. I am only afraid of leaving you. Do not let our story become a shrine. Do not let your heart turn into a museum of us. You have too much life left to live. Promise me you will love again. Promise me you will let someone else hear that glorious laugh of yours. The greatest honor you could ever do my memory is to be happy. That is all I have ever wanted. Yours, in this life and whatever comes after. Thomas. Tears streamed down Amelia's face. Ben was silent for a long time, the letter trembling in his hand. She never did, he finally said. She never loved again. But she was happy, Amelia insisted, thinking of the later, rarer photos of Eleanor with friends, in her garden, with a young Frank and his family. In her own way, she honored his love by living a full life, just not the one he thought she should. Ben looked at her, his stormy eyes searching hers. He was telling her to let go. Maybe, Amelia said, taking his hand. But maybe the lesson isn't about letting go of love. Maybe it's about not being afraid of it. Thomas wasn't afraid of her loving someone else. He was afraid of her being afraid to love. The letter changed something. It was no longer a story of an ending, but a torch passed. Ben, who had been intimidated by the perfection of his grandparents' love, saw its humanity, its selflessness. He saw that true love wasn't about possessing, but about freeing. And Amelia, who had been searching for roots, realized she wasn't just living in a house with a history, she was becoming part of its ongoing story. The climax came on a clear, cold night in December. The attic was finally empty, the last of the Miller family history carefully sorted, with Frank keeping some items and donating others to the local historical society. Only the album remained with Amelia and Ben. They were in her living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, the Christmas lights from the tree twinkling in the reflection of the window. Ben was unusually quiet. He took the album from the coffee table and opened it to the first page, to Eleanor and Thomas's beginning. "Amelia," he began, his voice trembling just as it had that first day in the attic. But this time, it wasn't from shock or sorrow. It was from a surging, overwhelming vulnerability. "When I saw you sitting here, with this book, you weren't just a stranger in my grandparents' house. You were the next chapter. I was scared then, scared of the past, scared of a love that seemed too big to live up to." He took a deep breath. "But you didn't see a shrine. You saw a story, and you stepped right into it with me. You helped me see it not as a burden, but as a foundation." Thomas told Eleanor not to be afraid to love again. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvety box. Eleanor, in her own stubborn, wonderful way, waited. She waited for her grandson to be brave enough to find a woman who would uncover lost love letters in toolboxes and see the hope in them instead of the sorrow. He opened the box. Nestled inside was a simple, beautiful ring, a vintage sapphire flanked by 2 small diamonds. "This was Eleanor's. My dad gave it to me. He said he thinks she'd want you to have it." Amelia's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. "Amelia Clark," Ben said, his voice now steady, clear, and full of a love as deep and sure as the foundation of the old house. "I love you, with all the hope of a new beginning and all the strength of a love that never really ended. Will you build the next chapter of this story with me?" The answer was not in a single word, but in the way she threw her arms around his neck, in the tearful yes whispered against his lips, in the way the firelight seemed to dance brighter, as if applauding. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a sense of profound rightness settled over them. It was as if the house itself sighed in contentment, its long-held breath finally released. They married the following June, in the backyard under the old oak tree. Frank stood as Ben's best man, his eyes shining with pride and a peace he hadn't known in years. The old album was on display, open to the picture of Thomas and Eleanor on their own wedding day, a testament that love, in its truest form, is a legacy that never dies. It simply finds new hands to hold, new hearts to beat within, and new stories to write in the attics of tomorrow. And on their wedding night, as the last of their guests departed,